does a lot of that kind of stuff, and that's on a little smaller scale. Mine has a little more power, and it's also pretty random. I'm not doing a lot of carving, so I thought I'd do both things tonight. And the piece on the right was the one that I brought in. But one of the things I wanted to talk about on this is not only the process of doing flutes, but some of the issues, design questions, construction issues you have to deal with when you start doing things like fluting. As you'll see, the fluted pieces I brought tonight, this is a nice fluted bowl. Here's another one, but you can see that this is different in the fact that the flutes are wider. There's also some other things different about this. And then there's, just simple stuff like this. This is a box with a very simple flute structure. So I wanted to talk about these things, though, because there are a couple of things really to consider. When you're thinking about design, there are some of the things about design of something you're going to flute that you really need to pay attention to. When you're doing texturing or fluting, there's two questions you need to ask yourself, and that is this something to feel or is this something to see? And if it's with texture or with flutes, if it's something that you want to see, you have to design your piece that allows for that to happen. And I say that because a couple of things. One, if you have a shallow bowl, something like this, flute in the bottom isn't going to help you much at all. Nobody's going to see that, all right? So if you're going to do something, shallow bowl, and you want to put flutes in it, then you've got to design it so that you create a wide rim along the top and you flute the rim, as opposed to fluting the side. If I'm going to flute the side, then usually I need something that comes up and starts to curve back around on itself. So you have a place for your eye to go right at the top. If it goes out like in a flare or something that's a little shallower, you don't get to see the impact of that fluting, all right? So the other thing is you have to pay attention to, do you have a place for that flute to start and stop? And that first picture was a hollow form. And that hollow form was shaped like this. And the reason for that is, my question is there a place to start and stop? In this, there is. You can come up the side and come right off of this angle, and you don't have to deal with flutes up in here. Because I'm telling you, trying to flute this, where you're coming up and then coming around the top, and if you would want to put a collar or a stopper or something on it, you got a whole different deal to deal with if you've got flutes that are coming into here. It's also on this this is an end grain hollow form. When you're coming up around here, this is all dead end grain. And so trying to flute along the side is easy. Trying to flute across the end grain is much more difficult. All right? So you always need to pay attention to, one, is it going to be visible to you? Can it come up around? Is the bowl tall enough that even if it's sitting like this, you'll be able to see some of that flute and have that worthwhile? And if it's not, then um, you'll have to switch from doing the side of the bowl to doing across a wide rim along the top of the shallow bowl. There are also some other things. Go back to the presentation. The other question is, what's the width of the flute? As you can see, this one and what I had in a lot of the pictures is fairly narrow flutes. This is much wider, all right? There's issues with that. If I'm going to make a flute, let's do it like it's going to be a wide rim. Where this flute is, let me make them a little narrow, all right? If this is a 1/2 inch in width, what kind of tool am I going to use to cut this? If I use a 1/2 inch burr to cut this, all right, what does that tell me? If this is a 1/2 inch between here and here, and my tool is a 1/2 inch, when I make that flute, it's going to be a 1/4 inch in depth, all right? So that hollow form has to be thick enough to handle a 1/4 inch cut into it. If I have it at 5/8 or 3/8 of an inch, let's say, now I'm starting to play with a thin spot in the valley of that flute. How about if it's a 1 inch flute? And I am now going to use a 1 inch wide bit. How deep is that? Now you've got a 1/2 inch deep flute. So how do you get around that? That's pretty thick. Now you've got a bowl that if you're doing on the bowl or a hollow form, you're going to have that wall about 3/4 of an inch thick. Well, that's a pretty heavy thing. So how do you get around that? Well, I'll pass this one around so that you can see. That's a 1 inch flute, maybe even a little bit more, all right? And it's only about a 1/2 inch thick. How did I do that, all right? The way you do that is 2 ways. One, if I want a 1 inch wide flute, and I use a burr that's 1 1/4 inches, I only have to go in 1 inch wide to make that flute. So now that flute is shallower. Have I lost everybody yet?
No.
No? Okay. The second thing is that if I make the flute, and now I put a flat in between and make the next flute, okay, I can give the impression of having deeper flutes all the way around, but the reality is that I'm not having to go to the full depth to get them to go point to point. Because a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here, one flute comes right up to the point of the next flute. If I got it an inch wide, if I put a flat part in between here, okay, I can make it shallower and still get it. So I'll just pass that around so you can take a look at that. If you're ever crazy enough to say, I'm going to make a bowl where I'm going to flute on the outside and flute on the inside too, because you can see the flute on the inside. It's kind of an interesting process. Now you really have to be very careful in how you set up your flutes that they offset each other. All right, if you understand, you're one coming in at a certain depth, you can't have the one underneath it right like that. It has to be, they have to be offset. And that way you can keep the wall thinner. All right, so those are just some considerations when you think about designing the flute. And I will say that most of the time, if I'm going to do a flute on a piece, I'm either going to make it, if it's on the outside of the bowl, I'm going to make it an enclosed form, which means that this open diameter is not the widest part of the bowl, right? The cherry one there is where it's more like this, but it's tall enough that I can still see it. If I make it so that it begins to close in on itself, then it's much easier for me to see that the flute. If I am doing it as a shallow bowl, then this has a lot of impact. So I can do it on a wide rim of a shallow bowl. That works pretty well. Can you go back? So then some of the things are, when you create it, some of the things are safety. You're talking about now using a bigger tool with a burr, trying to be precise and delicate over that. You don't want to be rough with it. You want to be very in control. As I talked about flute width versus depth, any fluting requires indexing. How many of you have used the indexer on your blade? Do you like them?
Okay.
Good. Maybe on a
Fair.
maybe on a robust, they're pretty easy. They suck big time on a Powermatic, and there's a lot of them that they don't do. They're not very handy. And so, what I have for my Powermatic, what I tend to use, because in a Powermatic, you've got 3 capped holes in here, and each hole will do a different number in a 360-degree rotation. But to hold it steady, you've got to take a wrench and tighten it into the dimple on the spindle. Take the wrench, do it, move it however many you want, tighten it again. That's really a pain. So what I have for my Powermatic is that's my indexer. There's on the top of the headstock, there is a recess cut into the top of that. This fits right in that recess. All right. And then I can slide this in and out. So it goes in the hole. I'll do my thing. I'll move it. Do my thing. Since this is an 18-inch lathe and not a 20-inch lathe, I had to get my other indexer out. So this one has an indexer too. I didn't have enough time to really figure it out. The instructions on the Laguna site were not that explicit. So the chuck is what holds it in place. On this one, some heavy-duty magnets. Now that tip of that is in that indexer, and so that's held solid. The nice thing about this is I can just rock it back and go into the next hole. All right. But it's a lot. I forget. This one is like something like 72 holes. That's more than I'm ever going to use. So I usually have to skip and do every fourth one or something like that. But anyway, so I'm going to set it up, do my first flute, then move it back and do the next one. But the first thing you have to do before you do that is you have to do your layout. So when I first started, I thought, okay, I need to have a center line for my tool to go down. But the reality is, I don't. I just need the two outsides, right? What's going on? So I have to do my layout. Now the layout can be done by either building a table. So again, since this is a 18-inch lathe, this table, the table I have at home, is set up for a 20-inch lathe. So I can take this and clamp it in place. And then I can use my tool if I have a long hollow form like this. All right. Then I have a nice long support table. I can slide the tool that I'm going to use back. And if I am going to do across the front, I can just move it like this. And also clamp it down. Now the reality is, I'm not going to use this one. The one I like that I have at home, I use for the longer hollow forms. For this one, everything has to be centered. And then the first thing I need to do is get my indexer out. And then, of course, one of the things you do is you take all of your tools that you're going to use and you build up whatever height you need so they're all right in the center. So then I'm going to make a mark. And one of the things to know about a flute, it is not all the same diameter, the whole length of the flute. If it's on something like this, it's very narrow at one edge and it's wider at the other end. And so what that means is you just can't do it a fixed depth and go, you have to control the depth so that you're cutting between the lines you've established. I'm going to do one more set of lines. Okay. Now,
do you need to know how many flutes you're doing to start with, or does it come out even?
it'll come out even
Okay.
because this will be set up like this. This may be a 64,
Right.
or in this case 72 or whatever. Even if you skip every fourth one, it's 72 divided by 4, so it's going to come out of 360. But you always, if you're going to skip 4, you got to skip 4. You can't get one that's a 3 and say, "Oh, I got it now." And you're going to find out you don't have it. All right, and so in this case, I'm going to slide this out here. I tend to like a long neck die grinder. I have another one that I had done all this fluting with. And of course I got ready to run this demo last week. And I had to turn it on and the switch broke and I couldn't turn it off. So I finally had to go find another one. Now, can I get the overhand?
Oh, the overhead.
Over.
Sorry.
So what you see here is actually a disc. Okay? The other, in the beginning, the bulk of them that I would do would be with core box bits. Okay? And the core box bit, it's a router bit, but it also will make a round hole in here, and you can make flutes with that. What I found though is that if these aren't really sharp, you'll get a little bit more skipping and jumping around than you really would like. So I moved over to these disc types, and this one, these two are the same, but they are cut saws. Cut saw is what Woodcraft used to sell. It's a finer thing than this one, which is the sabretooth. This sabretooth burr will cut really well also, but it's rougher, all right? So I tend to like the the cuts off. So in this case, I'm going to, now, let me just say, when I am done with this, I'm not going to make this rim the rim too tremendously wide. I'm going, or so that I get down into that really thin part of the flute. And let's say I make this the kind of rim width I'm going to do. All right. So. Okay, so all I really need to do is pay attention to out here. More. I didn't make it all the way out to the edge. Do one more. Nope. This is really the one where it's kept twice, cut once. So the other thing to pay attention to now, as you can see, you get some burning. You almost always do when you use a burr. So what I do is usually get a dowel about the size of the flute. I'll just run that back and forth. And if I want to have this as wood and not painted or something, it takes me a while. But I got to sand through the burn off of it, and then I can get a pretty clean series of flutes.
What grit paper is that now?
What's that?
What grit?
100 or no, 150. And so I would go through a series of you know, the different grids.
Overhead?
Yeah. So you can see that they're tapered, all right, just like, that's because you have it drawn out. And so what I'm doing is when I'm using that bit, I can see the top edge when I'm doing it. So what I'm doing is I'm just watching how close that edge is coming to the line that I've drawn. Okay?
So is the outside actually deeper than the inside?
No, it's just that well, yeah, it is. It's not as wide, all right. And yes, it is deeper out here. And the other thing, this one is flat across. You can make it a rounded rim as well and follow it around. It's a little bit more complicated in when you draw it out. But if you have this set at the right height and you're just tracing them one after the other, you've got the inside and outside. It used to be I would draw 3 and say, oh, it's got to be lined up with the middle one, and then the other, you only need the 2 outsides. That's all you really need. And then you can just go through. But you can see that this isn't that complicated. And if you take your time, you can get a pretty nice flute out of that without having to do too much work. Although you do need to pay attention to the indexer and be in the right spot and make sure that indexer isn't moving around. So
Tell us a little bit more about the bit you're using in it.
it's a, here, I'll send this one around.
Is it got, you know, it's got some characteristics? Is it diamonds or?
Yeah, it's
What are they
it's got
called?
like little fingers kind of things in it. As it cuts all is like that as
Is it like the
opposed-
bird tool?
What's that?
Like the bird tools?
Yeah.
Saber-tooth birds, or kind of?
Well, the sabretooth has actually little teeth like in it. This doesn't. It's like more like little fingers.
Have you tried the different colors of cuts off?
Right.
I mean, of saber-tooth? Because they've got the yellow, the green, and then the white.
Right, orange and white.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've used whites before.
Okay.
On some of them. This one's a yellow. All right. The other thing is, in fact, let me send this one around. You can see the difference.
And do any of them not make it burn, or does it matter what burr you use is going to give you that burn line?
No, I think for me, this, having it, this diameter, in facing this direction, as opposed to trying to do it with a router bit that has to be this way. All right, here I can move it like this. If you're using a router bit, you got to move it like this, and you don't have nearly as much stability when you're trying to do that. Let's see if I can.
So if you're making smaller flutes, do you use like the cuts all the little round ball burrs, or you continue to use something like that, like it is?
These are the saber-tooth, and this is the smaller cut saw.
Okay.
All right, and I go down to here, I have a white one that's even smaller. Now, you can use a round saber-tooth as well.
Okay.
That'll work fine, because you can also pull that from the side as opposed to a router bit. in the beginning, the guy, I think Don, you probably already remember Al Caton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Al was Mr. Flute back in the day, and he always used router bits. And so I started with that, and
I've got this whole VHS tape still.
oh, there you go. Yeah.
And I have a
In
player.
fact, we used to have it in our library as well. But you can, if you have a really long neck, you can do a little bit of power sanding with a cylinder. Actually, there is, you've seen those cylinders probably that have a slot in them. They're about this long. And you wrap the paper around and it goes in the slot, and you have a keyway to hold the sandpaper in place. It's about this long. You can use that on one of those tools to clean up the flutes as well. So, all I really wanted to show you with that is it's not really all that complicated. The design issues you have to pay attention to, and then, you know, go ahead and just take it easy. As you can see, I was very slow and deliberate as I was drawing that bit across there. The reason I brought this, I'm not going to set it up, is I also ran a lot of these initially off of air. Okay, and so this is another long neck one, so you can get in here and do it. But this compressor isn't big enough. You need a pretty good compressor to run a die grinder like this off of air. All right. So let's go back to the overhead. I mean, to the presentation. And there, so that was the sanding of the flutes in the end. And that was for the tool choice. You have the choice of air or long neck grinder. I mean, you can get stuff like this that are up to $1,500. This one is about 60, I think. It's got it off Amazon. So now, let me talk about a little bit about burrs and some cutters and things for doing texture. I'm going to use a couple of different cutter techniques today. This is just a scallop. The whole surface of this is scalloped with a mat nut cutter. Mat nut. And I'll show that in a minute. And then this one is done with a chainsaw attachment to a proxon. Let me get the indexing wheel off of here. There. Fine. So this stuff coming up is now an accumulation of tools. This is not something you say, I'm going to run out and going to go buy all these tomorrow. There are a lot of different techniques that you can use based on the burr that you've got. In fact, I think I'm going to just, I don't want to take that off. I'll just switch with this. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is show some other tools that you can use to add texture. One of them is a proxon. So have you seen anybody?
What is it again?
This is a proxon. But what you have here is a little chainsaw. All right. This one also, another very common bit to use with that is called an Arbortech. Okay? And this Arbortech has two carbide cutters on it. And it fits in here. And I'll show that too. But one of the things about this is I'm going to do this around maybe 600. And while I could do this with the piece stationary, one of the things you can do, holding it very carefully, can you see that at all? So what you've got is a spirally cut into there. And that was the second one that I sent around. It looks like a fire. So we just do it off the edge. Now, as you can see, one of the issues with that, it gives you a heck of a texture, but it also tears it up somewhat. So what you really need, I didn't bring one, I just have a little tiny thing tonight, is a brush where you can go in there and try and knock some of that out, go in both directions. But one of the guys I follow on YouTube it's a YouTube called From a Seed, and he does an awful lot of this kind. He doesn't do nearly as much turning as he does just the texturing. But one of the things he uses to get rid of a lot of that is a toilet bowl brush, because a new one, because it's pretty tough, and you can just go in there and it tends to get into that.
What was the name, Ed?
From a Seed.
S-E-E-D?
S-E-E-D.
From a seed.
And he does, mainly what he does is he'll take a lot of stuff like this and do all kinds of texturing on the surface and turns them into sculpture. All right? But I'm just gonna, I need to use the other side, but I'll show you what. You can see that this really
Hard to make.
hard to make.
Is there a particular type of wood that you would do this on, the harder the better?
Yeah,
Okay.
especially, you don't want anything stringy, because you're gonna get even more fuzz that way, all right? But I think it's a very interesting way to get a pretty in-depth texture in a hurry.
Could you do that on a curved surface as well?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, and as you can see,
curved surface.
you might think that, holy crap, I'm turning the chainsaw, it's going to get away from me. You could see that that was not the case. All right?
You would literally call that a chainsaw?
No, it's a chainsaw. It's a chain. What are you, chain bits?
Here.
Here?
Pass it around. So I could do the same thing with a Proxon. And if you know King Arthur's tools, King Arthur has an upgrade version of this. I think it's an Excalibur.
Yeah.
And that's the one that Nick Agar uses. He helped design that. It will handle one of the things, if you're doing a lot with the Proxon, it gets a little toasty. And I'm just going to clean this off.
What are you looking for?
My glasses. Oh my God.
Glasses.
So now I'm going to do it with the Arbortech. And you don't want to go too fast with this, because the faster you go, the more skip there is between contacts. Right? So if you want a more dense kind of texture, you know, have this 500. And once again, you can see very similar to what the chainsaw does, but it digs out more individual gouges because it's just two cutting tips on that. And there isn't quite as much fuzz that's raised. Enough that it'll take you a while to get through it. But, again, brushing it is about it.
What tool is that in? What's the name of that tool?
This is also a Proxon, same as the other one. The difference is the fit in it is an Arbortech.
Arbortech.
Arbortech. Okay? Now,
Does painting that help then with the tear out? Once you brushed it all down, I noticed you had it painted.
yes.
Is that-
One of the things that, for most of the stuff that I do, and most of the stuff that From a Seed does, is they're all paint. That's just, for me, that's pretty typical. I have a lot, I really like doing things in black in general. Anyway. So, that's one of the considerations you have to have. So let's go back to the, maybe we jump all around here. Let's go back to the presentation.
Okay, again.
So, one of the things that most of this stuff you'll see I'm doing on the rim of the bowl. You're not going to get a whole lot of value out of doing something like that on the outside of the bowl. So this is mainly on the rim kind of thing. So how wide do you want your rim? You know, that was a pretty wide rim. One of the things about a rim, go back over to here. If I'm going to do a wide rim, what kind of shape of a bowl should I have? Should I have a regular bowl shape? That's heavier than one. You know, there's no finesse about that at all. So you kind of really only have two options in my mind. One, is an OG. Okay? And that OG gives you thinness out here, lightness. It's a nice feel underneath. The other one is called, again, I'll start with, it's called a flare. And that's another one where you can give the appearance of lightness in the bowl, even though you have a wide rim, to do some detail. Okay? Okay.
So Ed, you would do all that texturing work and stuff first, and then you would turn it to get your finished shape that you're doing here?
Generally I will leave the face solid, okay, and do whatever my technique is going to be here. But I will have done, like here, I will have turned the OG first. And I will control the thickness that I have depending on the technique that I'm going to use. If I'm going to make something deep, you know, I got to leave more thickness here. If it's, you know, I get done and I like the shape and now I'm going to do this and realize I'm not going to do that much, I'll go and take some of this down from the top. All right? Don't make it too thin though, because you'll start to get vibration out here. That's particularly true with a flare cord, because you have so little mass underneath. We're going to move on to something different now. So, this is the Trent Bosch device. I like it a lot because you can take it right off of the lathe, leave it in the chuck, do your thing, put it back on the lathe if you need to. Okay, and we're going to use some bits. Prolong all of this. That blue one that has the scallops all over the top, that's a matte. It's got 3 carbide cuff cutters in it. All right?
Did you do the same thing, or how did you actually use it?
It was, I had that in a drum, and I just did all over that.
So it was like on that stand, and then you just went around, it wasn't while it was
No.
turning.
Nope.
Ed, is that a brand name, Mapna?
Mapna.
Or is that a type?
NEFWTA, that's the brand. They're not inexpensive. They're about $50 or $60 each. There are 3 kinds. That's a round one. They have them with a triangle, and they have them with a square cut. Then they now have another one the next size up, and it comes with a set. It's about $300 something for that. So, although you can do a lot of stuff with a Dremel, all right, the reality is with a Dremel, you're limited to basically an 1/8" shaft. All right, if you want a little bit more oomph out of it and get up to a 1/4" shaft, then you need to use something like this. This is a Weecher. That was one of the brand names that Woodcraft had, but also the standard one that people use is called Fluting. So in this case, I'm just using a corner. This is a cylindrical bit, cut all the way to the edge. But you can see how different the shape is of the texture. is pretty dynamic. It's boring for me to go through this now. Just a little bit of the time. So you can see with those three bits, a round bit, a cylindrical bit, and a plane bit, you can get pretty different shapes. And there's pointed bits and all that stuff that you work and trying to get, work out to the lines, and you can get yourself a nice pattern. One more plus on change I'm going to make. I'll show you one other technique. You can also go up to a full-size die grinder, alright, and use cut-off discs. Cut-off discs. So one of the other features you can do So if you see this one, this is just the disc. It's got cutting surfaces on both sides and on the edge. So you can just go ahead and cut yourself slots in this. This also makes it pretty interesting, especially when you get them fairly close to each other. So the only thing you want to really make sure when you're doing this is you're doing it as it's radiating from the center. If you keep on doing this, you're going to lose that effect of it coming out as rays. All right. Two more things I want to do, and then we'll call it a night. So one of the really common techniques, I'm going to go back to the over to the presentation, is stippling. Stippling is very common as a way to either provide, mostly to provide a background. And so, as you can see that on that Asian hollow form to the left, the entire black surface is stippled. All right, so it's got a really nice texture to it. In this this coral platter here, all around all those holes on all the available wood, it's all been done with a Dremel with a small bit for days. But it adds a real nice texture, and that one adds a real nice background. But what are the issues? How pronounced do you want the background to be? Are you doing it like on that first one? I just want that one to be a textured surface to highlight the flowers. All right, I don't want it to compete with the flowers. On the coral bowl, that whole thing is given that whole impression. So it's the holes, it's the space in between, and all of the texturing from the stippling all works together. Again, tactile versus visual. How much of that roll if you just want to have that, pick that thing up and say, oh, that feels good. It's, I lost it. And then the other thing is stippling can be done with pyro, mechanical, or with burrs. It is very time consuming, and the pyro and some of the burrs scorch and will probably need to be painted. Can't get rid of that That's why that coral bowl that you saw there is painted off white, and the Asian hollow form is black. Okay, so one of the fast ways to do stippling. See, one way you can do stippling. This is a very simple and easy way. This is a little Dremel engraver, all right? You take the point out of it and round the point over. So that's my stippling right here. It's noisy. I want to do that a little faster. If I can find my tool. Here's my fast tool. That's about as fast as you can stitch. All right, and this is a piece that was done that way.
And you would sand after that?
I'm gonna, it depends, all right? One of the things about this, this tool is the needle, it's a, what's called, this is called a mini needle scaler. All right? And the scales in it, or the things that do the scaling in it, when they come, they're cut flat off, and the edges are really sharp. So you have to take it apart, take each one of these needles out, and round them over. I take them to a grinder, I round them a little bit, and then I sand them to get them nice and round and smooth. When you do that, it doesn't break the fiber surface, okay? It dents the fiber surface, which is really what you want. The more you dent it, the less fuzz you get, all right? The one other technique, so I could put, this is a wood burner, homemade wood burner, and I could put a stippling bit in here, clip in here, but I'm going to leave it with one that I use pretty regularly, and that's a coil. So you can see it gets pretty toasty. So most of those Asian-looking pieces were all stippled like this, except using a stippling tip rather than a coil tip. But the nice thing about a coil tip or any of the other tips, I make my own tips, and
kind of wire do you
That's what I was just going to show you. It's nichrome wire, nickel chrome wire. I tend to take it. This is what it looks like. Okay, it's a tough wire, but I usually get it in 20 gauge and maybe 22 gauge. And then you just take it and bend it with pliers, and it just gets hot. And you make the tips so that they fit in. This is, as you can see, this is well used. This tip, these used to come from Radio Shack. They're just connectors, and you can just put the nichrome wire tips in there. But you can also use, I just would unplug it, and I have a fair number of, these are all commercial ones, you can use it, but these are more for shading and doing stuff like that as opposed to making pattern. So let me show you what a couple of these are like. This is one of those that I think is really a waste of time, because I got a nice texture, but all you're really is feeling it. You're not seeing it at all. But if you look at it, that's a basket weave. And then,
So if you did different colors, would that catch your eye?
maybe,
Because Tracy does
yeah,
kind of like that.
yeah. I don't know, I kind of like black. And, so I use Artist Heavy Body acrylics, and I put it on usually with a toothbrush to really get down into that texture. But that's one where I've created a series of oval round patterns.
What wire was it you use?
Nickel chrome, nichrome. Nichrome. Nickel chrome. It's NICR is how it. And so if you say nichrome wire, but there, if anyone is interested, there was a lot of concern at the time that the Grand Criddle, who we had down to the symposium and to our club, was the first one to really, not the first one, but he was the one that would take it with him and burn, because most of the commercial ones can't get hot enough to get that kind of intense pyrography branding. So he was getting to the point where he was beginning in New Zealand building out of welders. So that was more powerful than anybody really needed. People were getting concerned that you're using, it's a battery charger, all right, you do some stuff inside. But what happened is an American woodworker published the real plans done by an electrical engineer. So that's what that's built after. I burned up two over time, but the battery chargers are that expensive, and I use a lot of, you can see different kind of batteries there. That's a coil on one side, and then you can use the coil to make other kinds of designs in there. And I use it a lot for stippling, because you make it better with just a simple tip, and you just sit there and do that a lot. I have to tell you one other really interesting technique. I don't have a piece anymore, I got rid of it. But I just thought I'd tell you if anybody has a real desire to give this a try. You have a hollow form. You can do something that people will turn and will never figure out how you did it. Okay? You can take in this case, go around here. Anyway, I'll just explain it. Just like you would, just like I did with the needle scaler, you take a nail, like a 8 or 10 penny nail, and you grind it and round it over and make the surface nice and round and smooth. You take that and you drive it all along this surface. Random pattern. So what you're going to wind up with up close is you're going to have all these little dots that are depressions in the wood, right? If you look at this from the side, it's going to look like this. Take your gouge and skim off this till you get to the bottom of that little indentation that you made, all right? And you can see it'll be a little whiter because you compress it, all right? Take that and hold it over steam coming out of a heat kettle.
Dimple.
It makes a pimple. And the whole surface will be little bumps. Nobody will figure out how you turn it out. I'm telling you. It's really an impressive trick. 'Cause how can you turn around all those little bumps and have a nice hollow? But anyway, I mean, I try lots and lots of things. Let me go back to the presentation one time. Yeah, normally with this, you can see how dark it is. You have to paint. These are pieces that I did with using pyrography to do the background. You can see the Jazz Festival one, that was a lot of stippling. So is this one. That one was about a piece about that tall. You can also create patterns like that hollow form. You can create a lot of different shapes out of with the pyrography. There are all kinds of design considerations, the level of detail that you want to go to, you just want to get a background, you want to have some patterns in there. What kind of burner you're using, you might make your own bits of the proteins or the purchase them. And you can still do regular pyrography in addition to the texture, as you see on the one on the right. That's all those flowers are burned with traditional pyrography, and then all the rest of it is done with texture. But so one whole. I won't do any much more than just a little discussion. But I do a lot of applied texture, and what I mean in this case is I use gel media or acrylic medium or sculpting putty, and I will dab that on the surface. That piece on the right, the piece on the right is a long wall piece. It was about 6 feet long, representing the river flowing through downtown. All the green in it is all textured with acrylic medium, but it's very thick and it was applied with a sea sponge. The other piece has a very subtle texture. It was also acrylic medium, but it was applied with a kitchen sponge. So anyway, there's lots of different things that you can do with that. I also apply other components on. As you can see, I'll take a hollow form and I will glue things to it. Maybe this isn't exactly textures, but the one on the left is leaves from Dollar Tree, just glued on a hollow surface, hollow form. The next one is cardstock that has several coats of Mod Podge on them, and then feathers cut out with a paper punch. The next one that looks like a dragon egg is all foam packs riveted in, and the top of the foam pack covered with purple nail polish. And then the pink one there is all done, all those scales are cut out with polymer clay. And then I glued all the polymer clay, put the whole thing in the oven to cure the polymer clay. Blah, 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 blah. But this was the other thing I wanted to talk about. The options are almost limitless. You know, you can try all kinds of things. But the thing is, you have to give up on the wood telling the entire story of your piece. Okay? You're going to do something else that helps complete the story of what you're creating. You do need to incorporate some new tools, and there is a learning curve for a lot of them. You have to be willing to try something new. The thing that I think is the hardest for most wood turners to do is to begin to think of yourself as an artist, not just a technician, just not a craftsperson, okay? That you can be an artist, just try some different things. And investigate techniques not associated with wood turning. I've gotten many ideas out of the ceramic community in terms of shapes and textures that they do. They're great. And then some textures can hide some things, okay? Like if you're putting feathers all over the top, it could be a bad sanding job underneath. I gotta admit. But generally, applying textures should be done on a quality surface. So it doesn't mean, you know, skimp on getting rid of those tool marks, getting good sanding surface, because if you're doing, like on that matte and scallop rim one, if I had had bad tool marks on there, they would have just shown up through it. All right? So that's really it. I know I really kind of rambled around, had some issues, but the point I think I'd really like to make is trying. You don't have to just say, I'm going to do all of this stuff and be great, but you can try something new. You can add a little bit of texture to some of the things you're trying to make, or try doing something with the flute. You can see that, yes, okay, there's some different tools here than you may have used, but they're not anything really too bizarre. All right, that's it.